I think and believe that the Middle East will rise again soon as a third force and power in the world. We have a new Cold War area, as I can listen from the experts, and that made me think about the Middle East as a broad area with all kind of different nationalistic and traditional views that differs from each other. Many people think that India is going to be the third big major power. That could be, but there is also the possibility the Middle East would get a chance to rise in between what's going on. They seem both to have the potential, and what am I talking about? Do I know anything about this issue? I don't know everything about this issue, and I'm not an expert, but I'm an observer, and I can observe that there are strengths in the Middle East that makes it potentially a new major player in the world. First of all, it has deep inner potentials, a big solid area of coherent language and culture, with differences, of course. It has many broad resources if you take it from the Arab Gulf all the way over the Persian Gulf and to the west in Morocco, which is the traditional Arabic area, all the way down to Sudan. It is a very rich area in many ways, in different kind of resources. It's centrally placed, and it has the attention of the big powers, both the challenger and the challenged. As I can hear from several experts, we are just in the beginning of Cold War II, as Niall Ferguson, John Mersheimer, and different others would say, and trying to avoid and all that. I'm looking at the Middle East, and from the perspective of that, there are potential for the Middle East to rise again. Its old identity and history is not lost at all. It has gone through a revival. Of course, a kind of suppression and inner fight and a lot of trouble. But basically, if you talk to people from the Middle East today and you talk to them like 60, 70 years ago, you'll find a big difference in their awareness of that cultural inheritance and awareness of where they belong to and where they come from, and the importance of the Arabic language and the culture of the Arabs. Even people who are very Westerners and not really attached to religion, they can still have this proudness of where they come from, and they can see through the hegemony of the big nations trying to suppress the Arab world. They want the Arab world to prosper again, or the Muslim world to prosper again, depends on how you look at it. And so the area has a big potential. And if India can produce to be a great power within its historic context, and it deserves so, because it's it's a hard-working country on that, and it has a fine spiritual way of trying to implement those values they have. But look at the size of the Middle East and the potential that's in it. It's much huger and larger. And if the new Cold War will hit in, the West will have big difficulties in keeping the Middle East divided and suppressed, because that is the taboo many people is not talking about. These people are not just fighting among each other because they could not agree. That's also true, and I have been talking a lot about the Islamic ideology, especially, and how it is dangerous for life and the Muslim nations. But as Arab communities, Muslim communities, as political nations, they are also under the thumb of greater powers, and for 30, 40 years they have only been under the influence of one big power. And if that power today is going in different directions and has to put all its force in to stand up to China as a challenger on the world scene, it will need the Middle East again, and it cannot help having this Middle East impoverished and divided. It needs to empower it, and by empowering it, it will bring all these virtues forth in its identity. That's what I would believe can happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it looks likely. Um, if you also look at the Middle East from that perspective, that it has, what can you say, statistically more young people than old people. So it's the future. Why Europe is called the old continent, because there are more elderly people than young people, and they have difficulty reversing that without insertments from outside, like us, who comes and live in these welfare societies or get raised here. We help this insertion, but the Middle East have much bigger amount of young people to throw in a fight or development. They have also money in large parts because of the oil and because of different other resources. But they are failed countries and states and places because, of course, they have not been valuing the human resource, and they have not been developing um, the facilities for independence and resource and production. They have just wanting to live on the resources, and especially living in an old fashioned way of being the ruler and the ruled. It's like an upper and underclass, if you can say it in modern words, or three, four layers of society where they should work together but are detached from each other by the upper ruling group and the people who benefits from it just under it, and then the rest of the people who just have to work themselves through the conditions of life. So that's what's make it also a big troublesome and failed place as well. And so if they can get back to that identity that they know best, and they can attach again and like feel at home without those interferences that has been going on for many decades, because the West is afraid of the Middle East and afraid of that identity that could push up and challenge it. But now it has to face another big challenge, and I guess at one point or another it's going to need the Middle East, and that's why it needs to keep it friendly and on its side and close to it and open the good relations. And that's why it doesn't help keep bashing the Muslims in the Western world, and that will on the other side empower their beliefs and mission and spreading of their identity, and for some people their ideology. So the Middle East has a great potential, and it's going to be a big force to look at. Um, One of the other major troubles is that they do not get along with Israel, and Israel doesn't trust the Arabs, and that's why it also has interest in keeping them apart, using much resources on that. Um, History will tell, future will show, and at the same time, the Arabs are using a lot of energy and resources of just being annoyed by the Israelis instead of getting a harmonization in place. And so that's what weakens the Middle East in its position. Imagine that the Israelis will feel safe and the Jewish will feel safe, and they use their resources pro-Arabic and not against them, and use them wisely like they did in the Middle Ages to promote the Golden Ages, because they did that as well in the Muslim communities where they had much better conditions and human rights than they had in that time in Europe. Um, Imagine that comes back again, and that the West empowers the Middle East because they need them as strong ally, and then you have those communities up and running again in no time, because they have a great vitality. If you don't know and don't haven't been in touch with the Arabic world, you find it just underneath the surface. A great vitality that stems from the culture, the nature, and the religion as well. And I believe the West is gonna need the Arab world and the Muslim world, and they have a lot of things in common I've been speaking about in another video. Maybe I should make another video just speaking about these commonalities on its own, because they share a lot in history, in thoughts, in ideology, in religion, religious pictures, in trade relations and philosophy of trade, the liberal trade, the open trade market. They believe in the human rights and basically human value in the same way. They have many of the same traditions, looking at life as a place of interaction and marriage and death and ceremonies. They look much alike. It's just the prayers and the clothing and the symbols that's different. So I think they have to empower the Middle East at one point, if they dare so, but they are so afraid. And that's why they turn the blind eye to a lot of the suppression that's going on. But if they want to put things right, they will gonna use these potential strong, valuable assets in the Middle East and make them more in coherence with themselves. And that's the way you will also win a strong and good ally, because then the Middle East will see that and understand that the West has been on its side, but nobody dares. It's what they call realpolitik. It's a scary vision for all these policymakers, and they will shake their heads and say, "No way, we won't get back to that state." So, but now a new world situation is facing the West in a new way they haven't been facing before. And old Europe using a lot of money on militarization and budget spendings on that defense. United States, who want to keep its strength but doesn't want to interfere directly and still needs to be strong and have the allies and have the power all over. Where could they go? They have reached India, but what about the whole Middle East? They have them on their side for the moment, but when China, they say, is working its way into the Middle East and has been for a few decades, it gets better hold or something goes wrong in the relations between some places in the Middle East and the United States and Europe, well, then the Middle East will be divided. But they won't be divided if they are brought into union under this common Arabic spiritually religious secularism. Let's call it that way. A kind of union in a new fashion that brings them together and, by the support of the West, becomes a strong and good ally, because they will together face that challenge that's coming from the East, which they like, but at the same time fear, and they don't really know what to do with it, but they know how it has been with the West, and that's why several voices in the Arab and Muslim world wants to turn to the East and want open trade relations, and some of them refuse to close their trade relations when they wanted to boycott Russia and China and all that, to say, we're not going to follow suit with this. This is your problem in Europe and in the United States. We are going to use these relations and maybe strengthen them. That's what they did. And I know people in the United States know that very well. So how to work on a better relation with the Middle East? Well, you need to empower them again and let them bring back that portion they want and then they need to be truly empowered and focused. You can't both keep them under control, shattering them all the time, and at the same time getting to use their full potential and power. It will go wrong, like it went wrong after the Afghan war, where all these people weren't respected and came back to their home countries as fighters and went to prison, and then they reacted by all this terrorism acts and trouble. It's also part of their ideology. I'm not saying that, and I've been criticizing that for a long time. But there's another side to this, that it's also part of the abandonment that has happened and is happening. So I'm not sure if this is going this way or can go this way, but it can also potentially be an alliance between the Middle East and the East, the Far East, because they see that they can relate more to their religion and culture and do not interfere, at least not directly. But unfortunately, these nations in the East hasn't had the best notion of respect for minorities, especially Chinese, afraid of the Muslim 100,000 minority people living in the west of China. What am I saying? 100 million living in the west of China. And you have the same in Russia, where they had all these fights with the Muslim border countries and satellite states in the old days, and up until recently. But Putin changed that and opened mosques and tried to appeal to these Muslim groups so they could fight alongside him, and that made the West look at the whole Muslim world and the whole thing as against them, and that's not true, and this is a wrong policy, and it's all affected by the reactions that Israel is putting forward now because they are afraid as well, and they need to keep under check and want to divide everything around them so they can keep strong. That's affecting the West as well. So, as one I don't know who said that, I think Mersheimer or something, that if it wasn't for the presence of Israel in the Middle East, or if Israel was at peace with its neighbors, the attention of the West towards the Middle East would be very differently, and the way of dealing with the Middle East would have been a different tone altogether from the United States. And they need to change that, both nations, both groups, because they need the Middle East and they are part of it, and the Middle East is part of what we call the Western Hemisphere of the world. And that Far Eastern one is beautiful and nice, and people like the relations in it and the respect for the culture, but right now it's becoming a challenge, and it's Cold War II, as these experts are saying, and I follow suit with them, believe them, because they are very insightful and clever, and I don't think they're just talking out of popularism, especially speaking about Mersheimer and Neil Ferguson and people, Yuval Harari and people of that sort who are very intellectual and really knowledgeable on these issues. And so when I am hearing these talks, I start thinking, what about the Middle East and what's the role in it, and where are the relations, and what has happened the last decades, and why is there sore feelings over there, and why is it always under the control of dictatorship, power empowered by money and police to suppress their own people because they have another nation? Why can't this big relation be different from the United States, asking them to harmonize internally and use their vitality and power to something totally different? But that needs a step down from the United States and Europe and the West generally, that the Middle East can get its identity back on its own terms. No interference. Leave them to develop their ways and protect that and help them protect it. And so they will find a kind of balance. And some people say, no, these people can never do that. And I have the same view. I'm very frustrated with the Arab countries and world that, oh my God, they will always quarrel and fight and never find each other and find any sort of understanding. And that's what's also a big frustration has been in my life for many years. But they have also proved that they can work along if it is needed, and they can quickly change. That's the vitality that is in the Middle East that the West has to build upon. And they know it can happen, and they have people to work and look into that. And I'm not part of any think tanks or any people who work on these programs, but if I were, I would be giving some views and maybe programs and ways of doing things, how to achieve these things more strongly, and how to use the institutions that already are there and established and has good relations to empower the Middle East once more to stand on its own, have its identity but related to the West, and strengthen those commonalities, strengthen the idea and the narrative of the common inheritance of the Abraham Accords, the common inheritance of the philosophy of the world, the look on life, the values we have in common, the open market, the value of the human life, the value of life after death, life as a treasure, a treasure, and all these commonalities I know they have in the culture, in the politics, in economics, and in the way of life that you can find in the Islamic inheritance as well. It's very, very close. They should do that. And who is listening? No one. And who's caring? No one. As this guy says on Facebook, no one cares. Anyhow, I'm happy to have said my words and throw them out there. And you never know, the wind can carry the seed far away, and suddenly it finds its root and its way, and maybe sometimes it just dies in the wind.